Hello and a very warm welcome to Sympathy Lab. My name is Kim Scholze and I'm the host and moderator of our Newsflash format this week. End of March 2022, the EU got huge steps towards textile regulations, and I have the honor today in this kind of spontaneous format to transform information from brilliant minds. I have the honor to speak with Rannveig van Iterson and Dr. Rüdiger Fox towards what happens now with the new legislative periods and with all what happens in the last years. Before I dive too deep into the topic, I would love to say hello to you, Rannveig. Good morning. And to you, Rüdiger. So in this session, we have about 15 to 20 minutes. I would love to hear you speaking what happened in the last, not only months, but years, and to make sure that all our listeners and spectators can really understand what happens. I would love to ask you for a short introduction of yourself, and we start with you, Rannveig.
Well, thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Indeed, my name is Rannveig. I work at a small public affairs consultancy based in Brussels, Ohana Public Affairs, and we work mostly with organizations and clients in the textile and fashion industry. And we support also with understanding more the EU sustainability policy field and how to engage with that. And personally, I am passionate about sustainable fashion and textiles, and also I am very, very keen that I can work in this sector and try to make sure that the sector is fit for a green future.
And maybe to add, as you are humble as always, saying you are a small agency, but you have huge impact, and this is maybe what we come to later after your introduction, Rüdiger.
Thank you, Kim. Hello, Rannveig. Yeah, my name is Rüdiger Fox. I joined this amazing industry about 6 years ago as a CEO and chief environmental activist of Sympatex. I would say, and I spent 5.5 years of roller coaster emotionally in an industry I had no initial idea about, being shocked at the very beginning of the ecological footprint, and being now, since yesterday, really proud of being part of a pioneering industry in the world.
Thank you, Rüdiger. To understand what happened this week, Rannveig, can you give us a short introduction of your last months and your last years? What did you do? What it is all about?
Yes, of course. And maybe to give a tiny bit of context first, for up until today or up until this week, there has been very little sustainability requirements for this sector, and that has of course been a huge gap and also long overdue, knowing what the environmental footprint and the climate footprint of this sector is. And because of this lacking legislation over the last years, a very big group of stakeholders, NGOs, both advocating on social and environmental topics, the industry also, and together with policymakers now, have worked on trying to push for getting this piece of legislation in place. And now, this week exactly, that is also what policymakers have responded to. So the result is that the textile and the garment industry is now on top of the political agenda in Brussels, and it's getting the attention it deserves. And we are hopefully getting also the rules in place that are needed.
Thank you, Rannveig. A little more of context out of your mind, Rüdiger, because you are known as a disruptive visionary leader in the textile industry. What is your perspective on the last years if it comes to what Rannveig just said?
Well, I would say it's a fascinating evolution, what I have been allowed to observe in this industry. When I came, we cannot say it's not obvious the footprint this industry has created around the world. I had the tendency to say we almost had still today medieval manufacturing processes which we offshored in countries where the impact of our activities haven't been penalized. Most of what we're doing in those countries would never been permitted in Europe. So we come from really an ancient way of doing business, completely ignoring ecological and social impact. I have been able to see in those 5.5 years that there was more and more awareness and more noises. As Rannveig said, it became on the political agenda, which I would say we need to compliment politics that actually they reminded us and became the bad conscience for us beyond what we were able to do. So we need to look at this with a lot of modesty, that we needed to be reminded. But especially in the last year and a half, I dare to say, and thanks to the work of Rannveig and other colleagues, I was really deeply diving into European policy making and processes. I was amazed the guts the European Commission has demonstrated by putting a legislative framework in place that will actually catapult our industry from the medieval age into a desired future where we really care about the next generation. I have never seen anything like this. This is, for me, touching still, and very emotional, because in 2016 we actually sat together and put a lot of, we should do things together, and committed to certain things, but we were pretty much laughed at by many and ignored by others. And all of a sudden, there's almost like a phoenix out of the ashes, a European Commission coming up in the middle of a time when we see the dark side of humanity at the moment in Ukraine. We see the bright side of European culture in this legislative process, in my view.
Thank you very much, Rüdiger. And before we deep dive into what it really means for the textile sector, Rannveig, when I got to know you last year, I was not believing that work like this can be done. So maybe can you describe the operative part of working together with Rüdiger and working together with your other clients? What were your days? What did you do? Because I was really impressed how this works. And maybe that could be a good introduction of how deep these changes might go.
Yes, of course. I think I also should mention directly what also the pieces of legislation are actually that are being put on the table right now. But yeah, indeed, we as Ohana then are supporting also our clients on trying to advocate and also push for more stricter legislation, but also also informing policymakers and on understanding how the sector works and what might be also the best ways of regulating certain things for us. And being based in Brussels, that is indeed how we collaborate with our clients, so we can make them heard in Brussels with those policymakers that are working on these topics.
So operative-wise, that means you had lots of papers to fill in and trying to really read between the lines what is the context.
Indeed, that is a bit how the practical work looks on a day-to-day basis, and maybe that's also why you need a lot of patience and a lot of time to be able to actually work through all of this. That's true.
Yeah, and I really wanted to have that mentioned because your work was amazing in the depths. But bringing it to the point, what happened this week, and what do you see as the most important derivations to share?
Yeah, very happy to do that. So maybe to give a bit of a high-level flavor, because it's a lot that was put on the table on Wednesday, and we are expecting more even that will be relevant for our sector. And maybe for just to as a reminder, this is still only to a large extent the proposal of the legislation. It still needs to be negotiated and by European Parliament and Council before it's adopted. But we now know with a very broad brush what the legislation will look like, and also what then brands and companies will need to comply with in the next years. So indeed, the EU strategy for sustainable and circular textiles was the big launch this week. It is an action plan. Imagine an action plan for how the European Commission wants to regulate sustainability in the sector. And to give you a bit of a high level feeling for what that means, it will, for example, as a first point, it has taken a rather firm stance against fast fashion and said that fast fashion needs to go out of fashion, and encourages brands to reduce overconsumption, overproduction, and really look into these type of topics as well. And how the Commission foresees to do that is to regulate both product durability, or how products are being designed, so those products that are being put and sold in the EU are more sustainable in the first place, where they're going to look at both durability requirements, recyclability, how does a product need to be designed so that you can recover that value at the end, and also put it into new garments. How do we make sure that the product is repairable? How can we make sure that in new products there are no harmful chemicals? or that we reduce the overall footprint or the climate footprint of a product. And for example, also issues like microplastics are going to be tackled also on a design stage. And these are kind of the rough pieces that the Commission is foreseeing on product design. So that's one piece on how we will be able to fix this. We also foresee that maybe in the future we consume fashion or garments or textiles differently, in a sense that we buy secondhand, we might rent, we might also more effectively repair products, through what we call new circular business models. The Commission is foreseeing that the sector will have to tackle its waste problem. So all brands will have to be responsible and financially responsible of the end of life of garments after a consumer has either brought it back for collection so that it can go again to reuse or resale, or if it then needs to go to recycling because it's not wearable anymore, but you can still recover the value at the end. The Commission will have a rather broad look also at what investments are needed to scale up infrastructure around recycling. So that is a key piece as well, since this is still missing and still need to be scaled up massively for the sector. We will also, the Commission has proposed to look at how to reduce, for example, the environmental footprint of e-commerce and also returns, since this is now also as a result of COVID that there's the increase of e-commerce has skyrocketed and all the implications with that. So that's also something they will look at. And of course, also look at social aspects in the value chain. So and that's where a couple of weeks ago, the European Commission proposed a new piece of legislation on how companies need to do due diligence in their value chains to be able to avoid and mitigate any risks on this piece. And maybe finally, before I'll stop, and because this is already probably
we could talk for hours
exactly,
because so many papers needs to be read overnight. So,
exactly, and this is really just a high-level assessment, and we have to now dig into really what it means for the sector and how we will comply with it. But the last point I wanted to mention is that there's a big push on how brands and companies will have to be more transparent about where products come from, how they're produced, with what environmental impact, and to be able to communicate this in a clear and consistent way for consumers, so to avoid any greenwashing. For example, we expect that you cannot communicate on a product anymore with just a generic claim like this product is good for the environment or it's eco-friendly. As a brand, you need to you have to underpin this very clearly with data and know what and verify that as well, so that consumers can trust that the product is truly greener or more sustainable.
Thank you, Rannveig. And we make sure on Sympathy Lab as a platform for various angles in our industry, we will definitely follow up in the various fields of play when we all had the chance to read through. So maybe, Rüdiger, you can add yesterday what we talked about yesterday, because in our prep calls we said, what does that mean for all of us? How far can brands go transparent, or like ingredients like Sympatex, and what does that mean just high level before we maybe focus on one point like like eco-design and monomaterials, etc. What does that mean? But right now, maybe you can add to Rannveig in this cross-functional, how should that work? What would be the next step to really make that starting?
If you allow me just one sentence or two sentences before how this industry looks, because when we go in the shop, we buy a product, we need to understand how this product got into the shop and what happens in the lifespan of the product. Until now, we basically almost like a river flowing. Something happened before the product comes into the shop, and that happens in a pretty fragmented supply chain across the world. So the product, the jacket, the shoes, whatever comes into the shop, has been created by a huge lot of players in the world that have been connected to each other with all the ups and downs of logistic challenges and others. So there hasn't been really a consistent framework around that part, which I may call upstream. So the upstream activities until the product comes into the shop were subject to individual national regulations. And of course, many people just looked for the loopholes and the countries where you can put something, where you can put more dirt out than you can do otherwise, which is, in all fairness, a typical outcome of the financial system we're having, because that you are kind of a bit forced to it under price pressure. The other side was that when the product came into the shop, and this is valid for, I dare to say, all the industries in the world, what happens after the product leaves the shop is no more the accountability of the brand, of the players, of the industrial players up front. So what happens, which I call downstream on the product in the rest of its life, has not been on the radar either. And what is the most fascinating for me in this legislative process, the European Commission regulates both parts in one. You can call the one sustainability, which is basically what happens until you created the product, and the other one circularity, which means when a product leaves the shop, it needs to go back where the raw material is coming from and feeds back into our industry. And that is the amazing new thing in this legislation. It's comprehensive. It covers the entire lifespan and actually the post-death destiny of the product. Now, what is also fascinating is that the level of transparency that will be required helps us to really make everybody in the world an advocate for that legislation, because like no other industry, apparel industry and textile industry concerns everybody. There's 7.5 billion plus policemen running around soon that will actually do the plausibility check of the products that go into the shop by very transparent, but also ideally simplified labeling on the products. So the EU doesn't not only call for a complete new responsibility structure around creating products, which, as I said, starts from the birth stage until after death and second life, but it also has created a transparency system that still needs to now be worked out into the details, but there's a lot of preparation, where actually 7.5 billion people are empowered to follow up. And I think that is the magic. The EU has put a framework that doesn't leave loopholes and creates a level playing field to do the things right. That and here we quite often talk, this is the both dirtiest or third dirtiest or fourth dirtiest, depending what you look at, CO2 and so on and so forth. One of the dirtiest, but it's also one of the biggest industry in the world. We talk about 100 billion garments, and 100 billion with the depth level we talk all the time doesn't seem a lot, but translating on 7.5 people, that's about 15 garments per person, from the baby to the old guy across the world for everybody. 23 billion pairs of shoes, 3 pairs of shoes per planetary inhabitant, which is covered by one legislation, at least when it comes to the European market, which is the lead market. So in the future, and that future seems to be with 2030, perhaps a bit way out with 7-8 years, but when you look at our industry, change process is taking typically 1, 2, 3 years until something emerges. So we need to start right now to convert what we have done so far by ignoring a lot upstream and ignoring everything downstream into something where we take a comprehensive responsibility for the product under the supervision of the entire world. This is massive. I haven't seen anything like this before.
Thank you very much, Rüdiger. And seeing the time that we want to deliver a newsflash, let's put together one important point, because if it comes to circularity, I guess this is the most relevant thing, where it's understandable where to act and where to transfer this into our daily lives if it comes to textile industry architects or engineers, press, marketing, etc. A short view from you, Rüdiger, on what that means for brands and production management, etc., and maybe then the what do you see Rannveig in the future? I would love to start with you, Rüdiger.
Positively speaking, I would say it's an upgrade to design innovation. Until now, we have created products pretty much by ignoring the impacts upstream and downstream, and we understood creativity as being the most crazy combination of whatever. What comes now is that actually the eco-design process, the creation process of the product, will already need to consider certain constraints which come out of that responsibility I was describing. But the beauty is those constraints will not limit innovation, in my view, but it will actually accelerate innovation. The moment you realize that only certain materials are recyclable, people can focus on developing new solutions with those materials. While before you could basically randomly design something, and the more crazy it looks, the better it was. So I think what is fundamental is we need to start now at the design process and educate ourselves in our organization that creativity actually accelerates when we have clear borderlines of our possible activities. As I said, the design process of collections, now most of the brands are working on kind of 23, 24-ish collection. So completely transforming the industry leaves us with 3 to 4 years, which is super tight. As I said earlier, in 2016, we had decided for ourselves, and that was perhaps a bit early, but we had decided for ourselves to go circular without leaving traces as a strategy by 2030. So we were planning for 15 years. There are now 5 left. And from the experience we saw, it takes time. So I think the fundamental issue is now we need to go into our design structures and in our design organization and say, look, that is now the new framework, and that's fantastic because actually competition will be limited on the good side of industrial activities, but it's still there. We can still be super creative. And I think that is the fundamental change. We need to start now.
And this is what you were always proclaiming for collaborations in terms of knowledge transfer, and maybe bringing that to this is the nutshell. I know how brilliant your mind ticked, Rannveig. Maybe you can bring together the high-level perspective you are delivering in your work with Ohana and you as a personality, but bringing this to why should consumers care what happens at the moment for those who hear it in the daily news, but bring it to a point for us, please.
Yes, maybe to kind of just echo also what Rüdiger said, because it's exactly what it will now. It will fully change how any operation, any design, anything how the sector is operating, but also complying with the new rules will become the license to operate in the EU. Anyone selling products on the EU market will have to comply with this, and that's why it is so massive and why it will have such an enormous impact. And exactly why should consumers care about this? Well, it does mean that this package or these pieces of legislation will guarantee or kind of ensure that any consumer who buys products in a shop will know that they are produced in a certain according to a certain standard, and that they have been taken care of from an environmental, social, and climate perspective when they were made, and that they also will be taken care of after the consumer has used those products. And I think, yeah, just to say it, that's why this piece of legislation is so massive, and why also what the EU did this week should really be, it's a really great step forward.
Thank you, Rannveig. And we will definitely follow up. That's what we already planned for Sympathy Lab, on some sessions to go deeply and also have some commissioners giving the stage to speak what happens last years of what it is now. And the closing words are, of course, on we need all to stick together and we need to bring our minds together. We need to educate each other. I know, Rüdiger, you want to end this session with some words on collaboration.
Well, I think we talk a lot on product qualities, on technical criteria, but what is even more fundamental is that the moment we shift an industry towards circularity, it completely changes the traditional, also linear food chain all industries mainly operate. Everybody will be client and supplier at the same time. Things will go around. We need a very different attitude towards each other. Plus, and this is the beauty in this legislative process, the EU Commission has set the scene where certain things can only be done in a collaborative manner. We will have collection system on a national level. It doesn't make sense that every brand collects its own stuff, tries to recycle. It's economical nonsense. But now the scene is set that we all collaborate on the hygienic factor on making circularity happen. We all can start working on a very different business culture we have with each other, where of course there's a certain level of product competition which can stay, but there's also a part of collaboration.
Yeah.
And I think, and this we were a little bit preparing in the last 12 months, because we have been like more the, let's say, provocateur in that process in order to get things moving. with yesterday or the publication day before yesterday, we can stop this process. We now can concentrate on moving together, collaborate, build and create a structure for a system where we'll have total different industry in anywhere between 4 and 6 years from now.
Thank you very much, Rüdiger. And to make sure that we stay in a kind of news format, I want to close the session by now. We post in the show notes everything you need to know for Ohana and for your work with Sympatex, Rüdiger, or our work. And I love you both for sharing your minds and what you did. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Rannveig, for all your support.
Of course. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me.
And for all our spectators and listeners, please share your thoughts with us on the various channels to make sure that collaboration comes to life. Goodbye.